Okay, so let's just talk about death a little bit. So I think that what happens when you die is that all of your consciousness dissolves, because I think that consciousness is like an emergent property of all of these different electrical, chemical processes that happen inside of your brain. It's an emergent property. Now, maybe we should actually pause there. No, let's stay focused on death. We can talk about like consciousness later, I guess. So, because death is an emergent property, in my mind, that means that once all of the mechanisms that generate consciousness deteriorate, then that consciousness disappears from existence and falls apart. Perhaps it could be recreated, or if the exact structure of the brain could be frozen in time. At the moment of death, you could perhaps, and not just the brain, but if you could preserve the exact physical structure of a human being, like store it, then you could reanimate a person, and what we know as a soul would be reborn. So this guy's So I think I guess what one would call like a materialist. I think that people are just matter, and that consciousness is kind of like it's actually really, that's why I keep on returning to consciousness, but I think that basically when you die, you're gone. It's kind of what all this boils down to. So without getting bogged down too much in the question of like, what the nature of consciousness is, at the moment, in my mind, I guess one of the big questions people have is like, well, if your whole life just comes to an end, what meaning can life have? So it's the classic just like existential question or questioning. And in that regard, my opinion, I think, is fairly standard, fairly predictable. Or not predictable, but it's fairly standard. Like, maybe I'm formulating it on the spot, actually. Let's see. So, what is meaning? Let's ask that question. What is meaning? Meaning. Man, that's a big question. Maybe we could specify it by saying like, is meaning like an attribute of something? Is it a property of something? Because if we're focused on the meaning of life here, right? If we want to ask the question, what's the meaning of life? In the case that death is as I've described it, meaning, even if meaning is like an attribute of life, saying that something is an attribute of something else doesn't necessarily mean that thing. It's not a definition. That doesn't define it. I suppose that meaning it isn't just importance. It has to do with how you interpret life, interpret a life. It's how do you maybe meaning isn't even the right word. Like, how do you interpret, how do you measure the importance of life given its scope? Because life begins and it ends. And so then I guess you're talking about the meaning of life. Maybe are you talking about like the meaning? You're not just talking about the meaning of all of the actions, because everybody's actions have consequences. So, you know, but the actions that people take aren't necessarily all in the service of a single purpose, because a person's purposes change over the process of life. So then if you say that the meaning of life is dependent on a person's actions, then it's sort of a moot point. It doesn't make any sense to talk about the meaning of life because people's purposes change so much. And so then people's actions, the actions by which you judge the meaning of a life, would be incoherent. But maybe we're talking more about the hypothetical, like if a person's life, if all the actions in a person's life were performed in service of a single purpose, then what would the meaning of that person's life be? But that's obvious. Then that the meaning of that person's life would correspond to what could be measured, I guess, just in terms of how well the person's life measured up to the purpose that was set before him or her.